Welcome to the Know. I'm Ashley.
I'm Gus.
Everyone's been setting their sight on loot boxes lately. Legislators and lawmakers around the world are calling on the video game industry to do something about what some might call predatory microtransactions.
And all of that extra attention has been causing some major pressure in the states for the ESA, the group that represents the video game industry, and its rating board, the ESRB.
The mention of phrases like underage gambling tend to have that effect.
Yeah, you would think so. And now the ESRB has finally responded with some firm, decisive action about loot boxes.
Yeah, they're gonna ban them? Wait, hold on. Give any game with loot boxes an AO rating? Require games to provide lockouts for minors?
Just as good as all those suggestions, Ashley.
All right.
They're going to label them.
Ooh.
And plus a few other things. I mean, seriously, do we expect the board who's responsible for labeling games to do anything else besides label them?
All right. So this might not be the thing that most gamers wanted to happen, maybe doesn't feel like a step far enough, but it is definitely a small sign that the noise being made by gamers, which is making its way to legislators, is being felt by the industry. And while some might be wanting more intervention, it is a good time to remember that government intervention in your favorite hobby isn't always the most desirable outcome if you can get a governmental regulatory body to do it for you.
Very true. All right, so let's get to the measures the ESRB just announced about loot boxes this week. The ratings board said in a published statement, "You may have noticed that we've been a little quiet on the topic of in-game purchases and loot boxes, but we've been listening. In fact, we've absorbed every tweet, email, Facebook post, and singing telegram sent our way." Do you think they got any singing telegrams?
I doubt it. I
think so.
feel like they're asking for something.
Yeah, I think so. And we've been working to develop a sensible approach to let gamers and parents know when a game offers the option to purchase additional content.
So they're gonna accomplish that with labels. Soon, games that include microtransactions will start receiving an in-game purchases mark, and that label will exist next to the actual rating of the game. It won't be included in the list of the types of content players will find within the title itself.
You'd think they would go in with the content. They already have a box for what is in this game where the labels go.
This is a bonus box. This is the loot box.
Okay, unfortunately for
sort
you,
of.
Well, let's find out a little more. So, unfortunately for you loot box haters, this same label will be applied to any game with DLC or expansion content, meaning it's going to be on just about every single game in the world anyway. So yeah, it essentially means an extra label on every game that comes out.
And when everyone's got labels, no one reads them. That doesn't quite translate from Incredibles, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Naturally, none of that really gets quite to the heart of the problem as far as many gamers are concerned. After all, it's not exactly in-game purchases that people have a problem with, it's loot boxes as a mechanic. It's the idea of paying for a mystery box whose contents are randomized and how many games are being designed from the ground up with them in mind.
But for the ESRB's part, they maintain that loot boxes they're not worth singling out just yet. In a roundtable today, the ESRB President Patricia Vance told reporters, "I'm sure you're all asking why we aren't doing something more specific to loot boxes. And I'll tell you, we've done a lot of research over the past several weeks and months, particularly among parents. What we learned is that a large majority of parents don't know what a loot box is, and even those who claim they do, don't really understand what a loot box is. So it's very important for us to not harp on loot boxes per se, but to make sure we're capturing loot boxes, but also other in-game transactions."
To that end, the board is also launching a parental tools website, which, well, all it really does is tell you how to turn on controls on each of your consoles. No mention of loot boxes at all. Again, not really tackling the actual issue here.
But it definitely makes sense that the ESRB would turn the discussion in this direction. After all, look, we're talking about the same board that was founded to keep the government from getting involved in the content of video games. They're an arm of the ESA, which represents the industry, and the industry doesn't really want there to be a conversation about loot boxes that would equate them with underage gambling.
Instead, they're making this about parents understanding microtransactions in general. Look, we're helping parents get a clue on the wacky world of microtransactions.
Just like that. In fact, that's the splash screen for their new educational site.
It's like the old Apple Switch video.
It's the bare minimum to see, honestly, if they can get the government off their back by hey, if we just add a label for everything, then whatever. And the government's been making its presence known more and more lately when it comes to its opinion about loot boxes. Earlier this month, legislation was proposed in Hawaii that would ban the sale of games with loot boxes to anyone under 21, would require publishers to disclose when loot boxes were present and disclose what the drop rates are for items.
And on top of that, United States Senator Maggie Hassan sent a letter to the ESRB which called on the ratings board to rethink video game ratings when loot boxes are present. Hassan wrote, "I respectfully urge the ESRB to review the completeness of the board's rating process and policies as they relate to loot boxes and to take into account the potential harm of these types of microtransactions may have on children.
Well, she also asked the ESRB to study the effects of loot boxes on gamers. In addition to sending the letter, Hassan also posed the idea in a Senate hearing of getting the Federal Trade Commission involved independently if the ESRB didn't act.
And that's absolutely the last thing the industry wants.
That's why the ESRB exists.
Right, do your job. So this new measure of labeling them is doing a tiny bit to throw those legislators a bone. Interestingly enough, they actually did respond to some of Hassan's claims in today's roundtable session as well, mostly focusing on whether or not loot boxes are harmful.
Spoiler alert, they don't think they are. ESRB President Patricia Vance said, "While I appreciate your position and concerns, given the longevity of loot boxes as an in-game mechanic, there does not appear to be any concrete evidence of gaming disorders stemming from loot boxes, nor am I aware of any scientific evidence indicating that unlocking loot boxes has any psychological impact on children more specifically. Additionally, in investigating the claims set forth in your letter, we did not encounter any loot boxes that specifically target children."
Reread that statement and replace loot boxes with gambling and see how you feel about it. Just like with the creation of the ESRB in the first place, this is what it looks like when the industry attempts to regulate itself. A lot of people have been calling on the government to step in, but that's not always the most desirable solution because sometimes you get things like the Rhode Island proposition to start putting an extra tax on violent games. I mean, and let's see how good the government has done with net neutrality as well, right?
Right. Well, I mean, sometimes, yes, regulations can help. But you also have to keep in mind that sometimes the government knows even less about video games than the executives.
You don't want people who don't understand a thing regulating a thing. That's a good rule of thumb.
On the flip side, you never know if the industry is going to go far enough to fix its own problems. Again, case in point, net neutrality. That's, to them, that is not a problem. That's an opportunity. And the ESA represents the industry, not the consumers. So it's kind of a give and take. Right now, the ESA and ESRB have given just the slightest indication the industry has heard the concerns, but also made it pretty clear that unless they get more pressure, they don't intend to do much beyond lump loot boxes in with every other type of DLC and make a label that because it's on everything, no one pays attention to.
Right. The real proof will be in how developers respond, but we've already seen some evidence that that's starting to happen. In addition to EA just ditching microtransactions, temporarily anyway, in Battlefront 2, we've seen other developers say that they're monitoring the feedback around Battlefront and other loot boxy games like Destiny 2 as they develop their next projects. And we even saw Riot Games disclose loot box rates for League of Legends. So, baby steps.
Yeah, it's a little give. We'll see if it continues. For now, probably going to be a battle of inches on both sides.
Very good.
The sexiest battle. Gamers make some noise, legislators make some threats, the industry does its thing, and right now that's labels.
Well, what do you guys think of the ESRB taking tiny action against loot boxes, sort of? Let us know in the comments.
And for future updates on the wacky world of microtransactions, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to the Now.
Naturally, none of that really gets quite to get.
Oh,
okay. So instead, they're making this about parents understanding microtransactions in general. And look, we're all for helping parents get a clue on the wacky world. Oh, no, I see. I read it wrong. Yeah, I read it wrong. Instead, they're